The death of an Indian mother shamed the Oireachtas into action on the X case, and Minister Joan Burton on why we need yet another austerity budget. Good evening and welcome. Later, the ongoing austerity agenda of the government. Another €3.5 billion will have to be found from a mixture of cuts in government spending and increases in taxes. All ministers are faced with yet again cutting their budgets, and one of the key departments is social protection. Minister Joan Burton is with us to talk about the challenges. But first, the fallout from the untimely death of Savita in Galway University Hospital. The death of the 31-year-old mother made headlines right across the world. The HSE inquiry announced this afternoon may provide answers, but the tragedy has led to renewed calls for legislation to provide for the safety of women during pregnancy. The expert group report that's been sent to the Minister, it lays out the options, but we may not see the detail of that report until next week at the earliest. But do doctors face legal dilemmas in real life? Do we need to legislate? Well, with us as well as the Minister, we have Independent Senator Ronan Mullen, and we have Professor Jerry White of the Trinity College School of Law. We'll start with you, Minister. The HSE inquiry, are you happy that it's been announced that it will work expeditiously, they say, and its makeup?
Yes, first of all, I think what's happened has shocked everybody. I think for most women, it's a nightmarish situation that a young woman goes in to hospital miscarrying a very wanted baby, and she dies. So I think for every woman, whether it's in relation to their daughter, their sisters, their own mothers, it's the kind of nightmare we just don't want to have to hear from an Irish hospital system where generally mothers and babies are looked after very well. I think it's important that we have the inquiry that Dr. Riley announced today, and it seems to me that it's a very distinguished panel drawn from both outside Ireland and from within Ireland, and it includes a range of people with specific expertise who will be able to tell us what actually happened in relation to this tragic case.
To the layperson, and in terms of these medical matters, I would certainly include myself, you have a panel of 7 people. 3 of them are from within the very hospital that's being investigated. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on any of the members of this panel, but it does seem odd.
Well, my understanding is that in the case of any death in a hospital, there has to be an investigation. And as I understand it, the hospital would be represented and staff from the hospital would be represented within that. There also obviously has to be as well a coroner's inquiry. But I think the critical thing is that we should get answers. We should get answers in a timely fashion. I think Dr. Riley has indicated that overall it shouldn't take more than 2 to 3 months. Obviously, because it's such an important case, it is important that we establish the truth of what happened.
The chairman of this committee is talking about reviewing all the materials. We're talking about days, not months. Why would it take so many months to get a result on something like this? I mean, the fresher the inquiry, one would imagine the more effective it will be. People get entrenched in attitudes, memories get vague.
Well, I assume that the inquiry will get down to work almost immediately, but inevitably they will have to meet, they will have to arrange to get documentation, and hopefully it can be done very, very rapidly. But certainly in terms of previous HSE inquiries, those that were done rapidly were done within a couple of months, and hopefully that will be the case here.
We have heard tonight that the family have indicated through their solicitor and a letter to Dr. Riley that they would prefer a public inquiry. Even if it means waiting a while, they would prefer a full public inquiry than this one?
Well, my understanding is that in terms of the general rules of the HSE, they would have to look at what happened in the hospital. I'm quite sure that the hospital management and not just the Minister for Health would want to do that as well. If at a later stage there is grounds for a public inquiry, I'm sure the Minister will address that. But I think firstly, the inquiry that the Minister has undertaken...
Do you understand what Savita's family want? Is they want this played out in public, not by eminent people behind closed doors, including, of course, on this, a patient's representative and so on. They don't want to play it out behind closed doors. They want to play it out in public.
Yes, but with due respect to their wishes, I think there's also a requirement that there should be a fairly rapid establishment of what happened. I think that should be published. But I think, for instance, if you were to set up a full-scale public inquiry of the kind that we've been used to in Ireland, that might take a much greater length of time. Now, I know her family...
I mean, I don't get this. There will be at most probably half a dozen people involved who will need to be questioned. You know, why does it have to be all bells and whistles, massive undertakings, when in fact a relatively small number of people need to be queried on this, and let's get at the facts?
Well, I think we have a lot of experience of inquiries in Ireland that can take a very long length of time. Now, the law has been changed to make inquiries much faster.
This is a three-day event. A series of things unfolded over 3 days. It should not take a monumental inquiry to get to the bottom of this.
Well, I think the Minister in the panel that he's selected has selected people with a very wide range of expertise, both from within Ireland and from without Ireland, who are people of international reputation. I think that's important, and I certainly think that the Minister's inquiry should go ahead. That would not prejudice subsequent inquiries if that were felt appropriate. But remember, what everybody wants is an answer to what happened to this young mother-to-be, where not only, you know, she went into hospital, it appears, miscarrying. Not only did she lose the baby, which would seem from the accounts we've heard to have been inevitable, but she also unfortunately lost her life, and her husband is now
We'll come to
widowed.
what legislative things might happen in the House of the Oireachtas following on this. But Ronan Mullen, first of all, your attitude to this inquiry, I presume you welcome finding out the facts of the situation.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we're meeting in a deeply sorrowful context, Pat, that has given rise to this conversation tonight, and our first thoughts have to be with the late Savita, God rest her, and her family, and her husband in particular. I think, you know, I would agree with what Jonas said there, in that let's let this inquiry do its work. I'm not sure that this is the moment to be talking about it needing to be a public inquiry. But, you know, if there are things that have to come out and be aired publicly, yes. I also think it's very important that there would be Irish doctors here, because for me, and for a lot of people, part of the context of this story is how people have been scared all over Ireland about Irish maternal health care, and I think quite unfairly.
I mean, you can have doctors, and we have one from Cork on this particular 7-person committee of inquiry. Why do we have to have anybody from Galway? Because after all, I would expect them to be witnesses to the inquiry rather than participants.
Well, I don't know right now who the doctors are, whether they're obs and gynae people or whether they're from other specialties, but I would imagine and hope that they are people of integrity. And what will matter most is not their philosophical view of things, but their judgment about what ought to have been done and what happened. But right from the get-go, I would say that, you know, the second tragedy in this whole case has been the way that this tragedy has been manipulated and used by people to further an agenda that has nothing to do with the high quality maternal health care that we have in Ireland.
All right, now the question here is about how this mother-to-be was treated, whether or not it might have been different and whether or not she might have survived. We have someone in our audience, Gráinne Bray. Gráinne, you were in a pretty similar situation some time back, isn't that so?
Back in 2005, I was pregnant with twins through IVF. And from the day I did my pregnancy test, I was in acute pain. I was turned away from A&E several times because I wasn't bleeding and I wasn't miscarrying, so they couldn't help me. So the pregnancy proceeded. One night I collapsed at home, and Manus called an ambulance and I was rushed to hospital. They admitted me. They still couldn't intervene because the fetal heartbeats were still there. That went on for about another week. And I was in acute pain, had an elevated white cell count, fever, drenching sweats. They could not intervene while the fetal heartbeats were still visible. So eventually we lost the babies, and I was brought down to theatre, and they performed a laparotomy and evacuation.
Now, at this point, you were only 7 weeks pregnant when you were admitted first, yet you looked that you were 6 months pregnant.
I was so distended. It was.
So there was a massive infection in there.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Basically, when they opened me up, the surgeon said he could not see any internal organs. I was just so full of pus, and they couldn't find the source of the infection. So then I had MRI and CT scans.
Okay, now they didn't want to do scans in
Because I
case
was
they would
pregnant.
damage the babies. This
Yeah.
was the point.
They couldn't.
So they saw you with this massive infection, but they couldn't investigate with modern machinery lest they would
Yeah.
hurt the babies.
Exactly, yeah. I don't think they actually knew they should have known there was massive infection, but all they spoke to us about was this fibroid that I had, that it was red degeneration of a fibroid that was bleeding and causing severe pain. But anyway, in hindsight...
Now you say, luckily, your babies died.
Luckily.
Why do you say luckily they died? What did you discover?
Because the consultant told my husband the night I was brought back from theatre that basically if the fetuses hadn't died when they did, that I would have been dead within a week. They subsequently found several abscesses, tubal, ovarian and on the sacrum, and had they ruptured at any stage, septicemia would have set in, and who knows? I'd had the infection for so long, I don't know how the babies survived.
So you reckon you were lucky to be here?
Yes, absolutely.
What do you want as a result of what everyone now knows about Savita? But had you been given publicity at the time, had you died, we'd all know about you, wouldn't we?
No, I don't think you would have. I wouldn't have made international news.
Because you were an Irish woman in an
Yeah.
Irish hospital.
Yeah.
But what do you want to come out of this process?
I want the doctors to be able to do their job, which is to save lives. And I think the government need to legislate. That's their job. And I think they need to stop sitting on the fence and just get on with it before anyone else's life is in danger.
All right. Professor Jerry White, this is a situation with so many parallels to the situation in Galway University Hospital. I mean, do you understand why doctors felt, if you like, they could not intervene?
Yes, I can see that there's problems around the application of the law. It's actually, the law itself is relatively straightforward to state. We know since the Supreme Court decision in the X case that abortion is lawful in this country if there's a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother, as distinct from the health of the mother. We know that that covers a situation where a mother might be suicidal as a result of pregnancy. And we also know from the Supreme Court decision that the risk of death doesn't have to be inevitable or immediate. But at that point, I suppose that's the statement of what the law is. I imagine that there will be cases where it might be difficult for doctors to decide whether or not a particular factual situation comes within the scope of the principles that I've just outlined. And it was in relation to that aspect of Irish law that the European Court of Human Rights in 2010 held that we were in breach of Article 8 of the Convention.
What would be required, in your view, to give the clarity that they sought?
Well, according to the European Court of Human Rights, what was needed was some legislative or regulatory regime that would provide effective and accessible procedures to women so that they could find out whether or not they came within the scope of the X case.
It's interesting, I got an email from a viewer in Germany tonight, and he said, you know, doctors want legal certainty, so too do mothers.
Yes, I mean, it is a question, I suppose, of trying to ensure that the constitutional principles that I stated at the outset, that they can be applied with confidence in individual cases, and there must be some sort of system to ensure that can happen.
Okay, now during the week we heard Peter Boylan, the eminent obstetrician, saying that he and people like him felt the sword of Damocles, the legal sword of Damocles, was hanging over their heads. We had hoped to have Sam Coulter-Smith, the master of the Rotunda, with us tonight. Unfortunately, or fortunately, a woman is about to give birth, and he has to be there, so we wish mother and baby, and indeed doctor, well. But he gave us a statement, and he said, this is all about providing safe and effective care for patients, and legislation is needed to provide that care. At the moment, I do not believe I am legally protected to provide the best possible treatment for women. It is an extraordinarily difficult area, but that does not mean we should not legislate as clarity is needed. There are a number of grey areas between a woman's life being at risk and a woman's health being at risk, and the medical profession wants legislation so that they can manage difficult situations. Where a woman's health is endangered, does a doctor have to wait until her life is endangered before intervening, even though the deterioration in her health is inevitable? Now, Jerry, what about that? It is, under the X case and the Supreme Court finding, it is about a substantial risk to the life of the mother, not the health of the mother, and the dilemma as outlined by Sam Calder-Smith.
Yes, I mean, I can see the dilemma. It is the case that you don't have to wait until the risk of death is inevitable or immediate, but again, trying to decide what that might mean in a given situation. Well, I mean, doctors at present, a doctor could make a judgment call and decide that the case comes within the scope of the X case. And if his judgment call is correct, then he is legally protected because the Constitution says that the woman is entitled to an abortion in those circumstances. The difficulty for doctors, I suppose, is the fact that if the doctor gets the judgment call wrong, and if somebody says, well, actually, there wasn't a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother, then the doctor has performed an unlawful abortion. And that's
for example, if an infection doesn't develop particularly, he thought or she thought that the infection might develop and it doesn't, yet he has performed a termination. He might be held liable by either the patient, the mother herself or her family, or indeed by other medical professionals around that person.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility.
Ronan,
yeah.
what do you want to say to that?
Well, Pat, if you were to have an opinion poll in the morning about do people favour abortion where necessary to save a woman's life, you'd get, in the light of the Savita case, you'd get a massive yes vote. But the reality is, it
is also the law.
Yeah, exactly. I think what has happened here is that the distinction between necessary medical interventions and abortion which directly takes the life of the child is being lost. I mean, the fact is, of the 171 countries worldwide, according to UN, Ireland has better maternal care rates than Britain, than America. We're always first or in the top 5. And another point, Pat, as far back as 1999, the Green Paper on Abortion, and I say this with great respect because we have to take every single person's story with great seriousness and sensitivity, but it was actually canvassed, I think, in the A, B and C decision, that it was pointed out by the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in 1999, around the time of the Green Paper, that there was no evidence that doctors were unable to treat cancer. But on the contrary, what is happening all the time is that doctors are intervening, and they are intervening with great freedom because it is quite clear from the Constitution and the Medical Council guidelines.
The Master of the Rotunda giving us a statement to the effect that they sometimes are faced with very difficult decisions. They don't feel they have legal protection.
Yes, well,
Peter Boylan said exactly the same thing, and others have.
Yes, and let me assure you, Pat, and I think I said it on your radio programme this week, I think doctors deserve whatever clarity can be given so that they can always act in the best interests of their patient, and I'm on record as completely supporting all necessary medical interventions, even when it's foreseeable that you lose the child. Dr. Calder-Smith did, however, say that in his clinical experience, he said this earlier in the week, doctors knew what to do, and he more or less said, I'm paraphrasing him here, doctors intervene in favour of the mother, and they know foreseeably that the child will be lost. And there is simply no evidence that I'm aware of that doctors are unable
certain situations, for example, an ectopic pregnancy, they intervene and they know there's no chance of the child surviving. That's clear-cut. That's not one of the cases we're talking
treatment.
About. Minister.
Well, first of all, I think every woman knows that, unfortunately, as we've just heard, a percentage of pregnancies end in miscarriage. A lot of those miscarriages, like what happened to Savita, happen relatively early in the pregnancy. And the understanding of women who go into a hospital with a definite risk of miscarriage, with all due respects to Ronan, is that doctors would carry out what's called a D&C so that the risk of infection to the woman is reduced, if not eliminated.
I agree.
Yes. So
I didn't say otherwise.
Well, you see, I think the problem is that we just heard from Gráinne, sorry, I couldn't quite hear Gráinne. We just heard from Gráinne. Gráinne was carrying twins, like in Savita's case, babies that the couple wanted and were looking forward to the pregnancy being successful. Unfortunately, as it happens in about 20%, I think, or more of pregnancies, there's spontaneous abortion relatively early in the pregnancy. Now, Ronan, what we need in this country is no grey area, so that doctors know that they are empowered to save the life of the woman. Now, medical
Joan, you
standards...
don't seem to understand what I'm saying. I think that's the only misunderstanding
Just let me say this.
With all respect yourself.
Medical standards in Ireland in relation to the care of women and babies in hospitals are very high. But there is a grey area. There is a grey area, and it's certainly my view. It's been the view of the judges in the X case in the Supreme Court, and it has been the view of the European Court that legal clarity and certainty and legislation or regulation should be developed.
I'll come back to you all.
I personally support that viewpoint.
I will come back to you all in a few minutes because I want to get some more views.
The clarity is needed. You're right.
Maria Steen. Hi, you're a barrister at law and you're also with the Ione Institute and you're a mother.
That's right, Pat.
What do you want to say about our debate so far?
There's been a lot of talk about grey areas, and 2 years ago one of those grey areas happened to me in my third pregnancy. I was told by the doctor that the risks of me labouring were too great for me and my child. And from about 34 weeks onwards, I started to get signs that it looked like I might go into labour. I'd had a very difficult pregnancy. I just wanted it over, and I asked the doctor to deliver the baby early. And to his great credit, he said to me, I have 2 patients, and he explained to me the risks of delivering a premature baby. And he said it wasn't so much a case of him balancing our rights as balancing the care that he was giving both of us so as to optimise the care for both of us. And so what he did was he admitted me to hospital, monitored me, and then delivered the baby early, but at a stage where he thought the risks to the baby were low enough and the risk to me hadn't gone high enough. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about clarity in this area. I think it's very important. I'm very conscious that there are women around the country who are pregnant, many of whom for the first time. Childbirth is a daunting prospect in itself, without fearing that when you go into hospital, if complications arise, you may die because doctors don't know what to do. That simply isn't the case. The law is crystal clear, has been clear for 150 years, over 150 years. Where there is a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother, so long as the doctor's intent is to save the mother's life, the doctor is protected and so is the woman. If there was no clarity, we would see doctors being prosecuted, and they simply aren't. That's the truth. And one further point, Pat, and that is, you know, there's been a lot of talk of legislation. I'm a woman who may go on to have more children. I'm very conscious of that. I have real concerns about legislation being brought in for the X case, and I'll tell you why. Legislation is a blunt instrument, and the Medical Council guidelines are a much sharper instrument. But you know, when you look at legislation, the problem is the difficulty with trying to...
We don't know, though, what the expert group will be recommending. It could well be that they want some primary legislation and then let the Medical Council go ahead and lay down guidelines that doctors and indeed mothers can easily understand.
Absolutely.
That may well be the solution that we'll finally arrive at.
That's true, Pat, but there has been an awful lot of discussion about legislation like it's the only way this week. And my concern is that the difficulty with legislation and trying to cover all the areas is that sooner or later you omit some circumstance and the medical professionals end up in a situation worse off than if there had been no legislation.
But at the moment they are calling for some sort of clarity.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah.
The advantage of the status quo is that there's a very simple legal test at the moment that covers all eventualities. If the doctors are calling for clarity, they misunderstand the nature of legislation and how it may affect their decisions. It's not going to remove the grey areas or their difficult decisions. They have to make those judgment calls. The law cannot make those for them.
No, but if they make a call, which they do with the best of intentions
Absolutely.
and with bringing to bear all their professional expertise,
yes.
and they are second guessed by someone. Suppose a midwife disagrees, said that baby could have survived. You didn't have to do that. That patient, I've been delivering babies longer than you have, you know, to a young obstetrician or something like that, and they end up being complained about and ending up in court. What they are calling for is some sort of protection if they do their best honestly, that they should not face prosecution.
Well, these life-saving treatments are happening every week in hospitals all around Ireland, and the fact of the matter is doctors have not been prosecuted for carrying out these life-saving treatments.
Okay.
So if it's an issue...
the facts are there.
Exactly.
Barry, yes, what do you want to say?
Look, it's been talked about, Ronald mentioned this, that Ireland is one of the safest places to give birth. Now, that's in relation to mortality or death. It's not in relation to morbidity in terms of the psychological trauma, the physiological trauma women experience. Like, the idea that this isn't a problem since doctors aren't being prosecuted is just, like, it's just finding ridiculous. Like, I know a woman who went through 2 pregnancies and she suffered from preeclampsia.
You're a medical student, is that right?
I'm a medical student. I have a law degree as well, actually. But this analysis is bizarre. But the fact of the matter is, I know a woman who went through 2 pregnancies and suffered from preeclampsia. Her blood pressure went dangerously high. Now, she managed to get to term and deliver the babies, but she had to make the decision not to have a 3rd baby, which she wanted to do, because she was faced with just uncertainty as presented by the doctors as to what treatment would be available to her, and whether she could actually develop abortion in a circumstance where they wouldn't be able to deliver the baby. The fact is, this happens all the time. We've heard this from Grania. I mean, is it the case that I am lying and Grania is lying, or is it the case that her analysis of the legal situation is just simply wrong?
Okay. Right, Anne-Marie? Yes, Anne-Marie, what do you want to say?
And I think there is a lot of difficulty, a lot of misinformation in this debate at the moment. But I think one of the concerns that I've seen over the last week is that the calls have been immediately for legislation based on the X case. We know that tomorrow Sinn Féin are going to present a motion in the Dáil calling for legislation based on the X case. And I'd certainly have a lot of concerns about legislation on that case. We know that in 1992 the case didn't hear any psychological evidence, and we know in the last 20 years that there's been a lot of medical research and scientific research that suggests
I think it was psychological evidence rather than psychiatric evidence. But the Supreme Court has been looking for this, or certainly earlier versions of our Supreme Court, looking for some sort of legislative framework on following on the X case. I mean, even taking the most benign view of our legislators, haven't they been a bit tardy dealing with this?
I think one of the, I would agree.
No matter what solution they came up with, by the way.
I would agree that there is some form, perhaps if doctors don't feel confident, and we want women to be assured that Ireland is a safe place to have pregnancy, which I think is certainly a view that a lot of women don't believe after what's happened in the last week. But I think what is concerning about legislation based on the X case is that it could lead to widespread abortion. There was no time limits on the actual case. There was no, and as I said, the evidence is not considering what's happened in the last 20 years. We know that abortion isn't good for every woman. We see that the Academy of Royal Colleges of Medicine in the UK last year came out saying that abortion is not appropriate medical treatment for psychological or suicidal ideation.
Okay, but the law as it stands in this country is that if there's a risk by suicide, any substantial risk to the life of the mother, that's the way it stands at the moment.
And that's appropriate medical treatment. And that's the difference. There's a difference between appropriate medical treatment and direct abortion.
Okay, and we know that the Church has come out with the idea tonight and clarified their thinking, which is if there is double effect, if the child loses his or her life as a result of necessary medical treatment for the woman, if that's the intention to treat the woman, then ethically it is okay, as if you like, the double effect. Mary, how are you? You're have a medical background? Yes? You worked where?
I worked in London. Well, I do offer my sympathy to Savita's family and to her husband. But this case has been hijacked by the pro-abortion people to bring in abortion in this country. Savita did not die because because of our anti-abortion laws in this country, nor did she die because of Catholic ethos. We have one of the best.
Well, you don't know that yet.
Yes, we do.
Until such time
yes, we
as
do
the
know
inquiry.
that. Yes, we do know that.
How do you know that?
We do know that. I'm a nurse. We know that very, very clearly. This woman had has had septicemia, and people can get that with pregnancy. And many women are dying in Britain every year from septicemia and pregnancy, and I think it's one a month, in fact. She didn't die because of those reasons, and what we have is the media...
No, in fairness to the inquiry that's forthcoming, and indeed any public inquiry that might ensue, we don't know whether or not she died in the way that you say because she has septicemia, and whether or not, had her pregnancy been terminated earlier, that she might not have been as badly infected or as rapidly infected. We simply don't know.
Abortion is not the treatment for septicemia. 21.4 of the medical guidelines are explicitly clear that the doctors can terminate the pregnancy if the woman's life's in danger. That is very, very, very clear. And there's no need to clarify that in any form or fashion, nor do we need to clarify our laws. They're perfectly clear, and the World Health Organization has confirmed that we're one of the best countries in the world for babies, and there isn't deaths. It's rather unfortunate that this woman has died. But like I say, there are people dying in England and they have abortion from septicemia.
Okay, you're shaking your head, sir. What do you want to say?
I just wanted to say that, I think, honestly, if the people who are making this claim that the issue is being hijacked by the pro-choice movement are going to make that claim to people like myself and people like my friends who attended the march on Saturday, I think that they're going to have to make that claim also to Savita's husband and also to Savita's family, because they're the people who said that they brought this issue to light, that they went to the newspapers because they didn't want this to ever happen again in Ireland. And that's the truth of it. And so I would sincerely like people like Senator Mullen over there and this lady in front of me to direct those comments to Savita's husband and see how far that gets them.
Okay, you've got your hand up there. What do you want to say to us? Yep.
Just in regard to what that guy just said, I think everybody has the same opinion. Nobody wants what happened to Savita to ever happen again. It's so awful. As a woman, I never ever want to see any of my friends go through that. But I think it's really important that we note that the X case and abortion is quite a different thing to what Savita should have got. Savita should have got all medical care. Even if that did end up with her baby dying, she should have got all medical care. But abortion is quite different, and I would like Minister Burton to actually clarify
hang on. What we know of this case is that woman was told that she was having an inevitable miscarriage. Mm-hmm. We know this.
Yes,
and she said, "Please, will you end this now? I'm in terrible pain." They said there's a fetal heartbeat. This is as much as we know in the public domain from Kitty Holland's original article. And they said, no, we can't do anything because it's a fetal heartbeat, even though the death of the fetus was inevitable.
Yes, now, I know that. And that's wrong. If that is the case, they should have acted. This is the very important part. A termination of a pregnancy is quite different from an abortion. All pregnancies terminate. They all end at 9 months, or they might end earlier. What happened? Her pregnancy should have been terminated. Anything done for the baby.
When you have a termination, it's often called therapeutic abortion. It's called that. So the term abortion, maybe we have a linguistic
difficulty. But in that case, you're saying to women that have cancer and were pregnant at the same time and get, say, chemotherapy and lose their baby, you're saying that they got abortions. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that we have to be careful
and you have
of
to be
the terms,
careful for
and
women.
we don't know, Savita, in being a medically trained person herself, whether she was using a word that was misunderstood by local professionals. I don't know that.
And maybe misunderstood by people that are trying to bring in abortion.
Yes, Marie.
I think there's been a great deal of insensitivity shown by some people, including an article by Fintan O'Toole at the weekend that this lady that behind me has just averted to. And that's the fact that there are women around the country who've had these life-saving treatments. I spoke to a friend during the week who had one, and she was desperately upset at the idea that what the life-saving treatment she had would be called an abortion. She was devastated at the loss of her baby. It was never her intent, nor the intent of the doctor, to deliberately destroy the life of her baby. And just what that chap at the end of the row there said.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing about the medical council.
You've said quite a lot now, and I want to get other voices in. I just want to say one thing
about the medical council guidelines. I think this is important.
Have you said it before? Because I don't want to hear it again.
No, I haven't. The Medical Council have a great deal of freedom in how much detail they want to go into to give guidelines.
Well, they claim they had a plain English guide or award for...
Exactly. But what is interesting is that there's only 2 paragraphs, Pat. And why? Because if they go into any more detail, it's likely to be not to be beneficial.
Okay, yes, what do you want to say?
I must say I am so weary of this conversation, and I've listened to it for so many years. and we're still in the same situation. We had X, we had A, B and C. Frankly, it brings women down to the level of objects. And this government has to legislate on this now. The Supreme Court has said it, the European Court has said it, and we're still here in this quagmire.
And you were part of the campaign for Labour. Is that so? Okay, Minister, we're getting back to the key question. What do you want from this? What does the Labour Party want?
Well, first of all, in the 1980s, the people of Ireland voted to recognise the life of the unborn child, but with due regard to the life of the mother. And this is what we're talking about here. It's about situations where the life of the mother is at risk. That's what the Supreme Court referred to in relation to the X case, and that also arose in relation to the case before the European Court. I think there needs to be legal clarity. I've said that already.
Do you want legislation?
I think either legislation or regulation. We have to get the report of the expert group. The Cabinet has to examine it. But just let me say this to some of the ladies who were talking there about the country being in some way pro-abortion. I think that that's profoundly, actually, to misjudge, in particular, women in Ireland. Most babies in Ireland, and we heard descriptions from Savita's husband and from Gráinne earlier, and from your colleague there beside you, the babies are wanted. But from time to time, I didn't interrupt you. From time to time, something goes wrong, and a woman is miscarrying. Now, in the event of a miscarriage, as appears to have happened in Savita's case, and we don't know the full circumstances till we've completed the inquiry, she went without, she seems to go without life-saving treatment.
Can we have clarity and that would be wrong under our law. You don't seem to understand the law, Minister, as it applies in Ireland. You don't seem to understand the Medical Council guidelines, which I'm actually worried that a member of our government seems to be so ill-informed about what our medical guidelines say, which is, and I spoke to an obstetrician during the week who confirmed this for me. He said if this woman had the slightest difficulty that needed an intervention, an early procedure, an induced delivery, she should have got it. Now, I don't know what point you're trying to make here, Minister, other than attack people in the audience. I think you should focus on the issues in a more honest way, to be blunt.
I actually think that this discussion should be without rancour. I think it should be without bad will, because at the end of the day, this is about women and babies.
Yes.
And actually, I think what maybe all of the audience shares is that all of the audience wants the best outcome for women and babies.
Yes.
But when a very high percentage of pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion or miscarriage, we then have situations where people become extremely ill in hospital, as we've just heard, and we have three eminent doctors, Sam Coulter-Smith, the Master of the Rotunda, Dr. Rona O'Mahony, the current Master of Holles Street, and on RTE the other morning, Dr. Boylan, the former Master of Holles Street, and all of them, they're eminent doctors devoted to women and children for all of their working lives. And they said they want clarity in relation to positions.
And they should get it. And they should get
them having that clarity through legislation or regulation.
I want to go back to Jerry White
as
the legal expert here. Now, the guidelines are there. You've probably looked at the Medical Council. Are they clear?
Well, I didn't actually look at the Medical Council guidelines. What I did look at was the Medical Practitioners Act 2007, and this is a rather technical point, but I'll make it very briefly. It seems to me that if the government, in response to this expert group report, if it was to decide that it had to introduce some sort of policy in this area, I think it would have to introduce primary legislation. For the simple reason,
even to defer to the Medical Council,
yes, to give
who would make the guidelines?
Yes, to give the Medical Council the appropriate authority to make the guidelines that have been referred to. Looking at the Medical Practitioners Act 2007, there's a provision in there, Section 7, which, to my mind, doesn't give adequate guidance to the Medical Council for them to make regulations at present. This is a technical point. It's nothing to do with the abortion debate.
So Ronan, here we have a situation where the Medical Council, even if it wanted to make guidelines that would be helpful to the doctors who find themselves in this grey area with a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, they can't actually do it until they get the say-so from the Houses of the Oireachtas in primary legislation to give them the power.
As I said in your programme, I think your radio programme during the week, Pat, that if doctors need clarity, they are entitled to get it. But I suspect what we're missing here tonight, there's still scaremongering about Ireland's top-notch maternal care system, which, by the way, is, as one doctor put it in the Irish Times the other day, we have top-notch maternal mortality. This is despite the fact that we have an underfunded and under-scrutinised healthcare system. The maternal care is actually, and our maternal mortality figures are the jewel in the crown. Now, to answer your question, if doctors need clarity, they can get it, but we need to hear in much more detail than this programme is giving, advancing the scaremongering about Irish maternal health care. We need much more detail about the type of situations doctors are coming up with.
Okay.
What I would favour...
No,
let me just finish the point, please.
I want to ask you one simple question.
What we want to do is to leave doctors in a position to act where they need to, as they do under the current Medical Council guidelines, in women's interests, even when that foreseeably leads to the death of the child. What we don't want to do is to legislate on a health ground, because remember, the 190,000 abortions in Britain up to 24 weeks, some of them up to birth, all of those, or most of those, have been predicated on grounds of health or mental health. That is why we have a more humane system in Ireland, and we need to hold on to it.
And we know thousands of those abortions, by the way, are Irish women who go there for those abortions.
About 4,000, tragically, yes.
But my simple question is, Ronan, just to clarify it, it's kind of do everything that doctors want, but do not go as far as legislating for the X case. Is that a fair summary of where you are?
Well, the problem with the X case is that it imported the right to abortion on supposed grounds of suicidal threat.
Well, that's what the people voted for.
No, it's what the Supreme Court interpreted the Eighth Amendment to mean. The problem with that is there is no credible medical evidence to show that abortion is ever a treatment for mental health. If anything now, the debate is when does it cause further problems. And can I just say one last point back? The clapping here tonight, I'm beginning to feel how Sean Gallagher felt actually, although I don't think I'll ever run for
that's a low blow.
No, I'll tell you it's not. I'll tell you it's
blow.
not, because the clapping, this culture of clapping, so you beat down the side you agree with, this is not going to do anything to reassure Irish men and women about the quality of healthcare. We owe each other the courtesy to listen to each other's arguments and to test them
Minister,
properly.
what about the X case in your case? Do you want to legislate for the X case?
Thank you.
I believe that the judges of the Supreme Court, and I don't know whether Ronan is suggesting that our Supreme Court, which as far as I know, and I'm not a lawyer, Ronan, I apologise, I'm just a mother, and I care about women.
But you're a patronising politician right now, Joan, if I may say so. Because I'm just a son and a brother, and I love the people in my lives, and I care as much about women's health as you do.
And that's great.
Thank you.
But just let me say this. You're holding out about the Supreme Court. My understanding is that the first thing the Supreme Court does is respect our Constitution. The people of Ireland voted in a referendum to recognise the unborn child. And the Supreme Court, in the X case, sought to address both what the people had voted for in the referendum and their view of what was presented to them in the X case. Now, I wouldn't malign the reason why they reached that view. They reached that view. The European Court of Human Rights...
do you want to legislate for the X case?
I believe that it's appropriate to have legislation, regulation that gives clarity in relation to this area. And I will go back and say what I said at the beginning, that a percentage, a relatively high percentage of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. And when a woman
made that
miscarries,
point twice already.
But when a woman miscarries, she needs generally medical attention, and there needs to be no lack of clarity in relation to saving her life.
Again,
that's
I
my
asked you
simple
the
view.
question the last time. Do you want to legislate for the X case?
Legislation
yes or no?
I want to see, first of all, the report of the expert group. No, we have a report coming from the expert group, which will be considered by the Cabinet. We have to give a statement to the European Court of Human Rights by the end of this month.
We've actually run out of time on this item.
Appropriate legislation
and regulation
is what I would like to see. The Minister is
staying with us for part two. Senator Ronan Mullen and Professor Jerry White, thank you very much for joining us. More coming up on that. 3.5 billion in taxes and cuts we're facing the budget after this break. Don't go away.